Happy Friday, April 25th. Today we're going to be talking about Leviticus 25. So the first part of this is about the Sabbath year. You were going to farm for 6 years. The seventh year, the land would rest. You didn't farm. You didn't prune the vineyards. You just rested. When we talked about this a little in Exodus 23, I said, that makes sense. Me, being the person in 2025, was thinking, yeah, just rotate the fields. Then you have one field out of 7 that's out a year, and you're fine. But that's not how God wanted it. You see, God wanted this to at least in part be them relying on God for their sustenance. Obey what God says. He provides your needs. That's what he's trying to show them, what he's trying to teach them through this. Because for 6 years straight, they farm, they plow, they sow, they gather, they prune their vineyards, they gather the fruits. They can sell, they can store, and it's food. And then the 7th year, every field would rest. Now, God said, if you do this, the 6th year is going to be so good that the 7th year you don't have to anyway. We're going to provide, you're going to trust in me, and you're going to have food for the 7th year regardless. So that's what God meant by that. Farm for 6, leave it fallow for the 7th. Now, the year of Jubilee was the 50th year, every 50th year. Because you'd have a Sabbath year, which was the 7th year, and after 7 Sabbath years, then there was a Jubilee year. So the 7th year, the 49th year, you would rest, and then the 50th year you would also rest, but then also the land would be generally given back to the ancestral roots of where it came from. If you were buying land, God said, no, you guys really don't own this. It's my land. You're, in a way, renters of this land. From me, I provide for you. And you would buy land based on how many years it had been since Jubilee. Kind of based on what kind of crops you would get out of it. It wasn't, so in a way, you're only buying it up until the 50th year, and then it's going back to its ancestral roots if it's, for farms, for property. Now, you could sell your property. You pay your neighbor according to the number of years after Jubilee, and he shall sell to you according to the number of years for crops. So that makes sense. But there was different rules for cities than there was for the farming for rural towns. Now, if a city had a wall, those properties were generally not given back in the year of Jubilee. This was mainly for farms, for small towns that didn't have walls, things like that. Because that was kind of the ancestral home, and is to keep the society agrarian. In a way, this would also keep mega farms from popping up. There was no, okay, well, you guys are all going to sell your land to this rich guy who's going to buy it all, and then you're going to be a tenant while he owns the land and your family's left with nothing. There's a lot we could learn in America today about that. Because our society is becoming less agrarian. We're farming with fewer and fewer people, and all the farms are mega farms, it seems like. The way that God set this up to where the land of your ancestors went back to your familial line kept people from being greedy. Kept people from building up giant mega farms that just ran everything. See, today, we have a lot of issues with letting the mega corporations, the mega farms build up and build up and build up, and then they're too big to fail. This was a way to keep that from happening, because the most that you could own the land was 50 years. And people generally weren't just going to sell the land to sell the land. They were going to sell the land if they needed to. So, to redeem property, if your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, then his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his brother has sold. If a man has no one to redeem it, and then himself becomes prosperous and finds sufficient means to redeem it, let him calculate the years since he sold it, and pay back the balance to the man he sold it to. And then he gets his property back. That, a fair way of doing things. A way of doing things that keeps power in just a few hands. it keeps society kind of working in an, and I hate this word, but not necessarily even an equitable fashion, but you keep your property in your family. Um, and I'm not going to say it's socialist because I don't think it is. But if a man would sell his house in a dwelling house in a walled city, he may redeem it within a year of its sale. For a full year, he could redeem it. After that, that was not going to be given back in the year of Jubilee. The buyer kept it through his generations. That's how it was. Now, the difference was in the cities of the Levites. The Levites may redeem at any time the houses in the cities they possess. If the Levite exercises his right of redemption, the house that was sold in the city they possess and they get in the year of Jubilee. Because the houses in the cities of the Levites were all they got. Like a tribe, they got different sections of Israel. The Levites didn't have land like the rest of the tribes. They just had a few cities, mainly for, continuing the sacrifices in those cities and being priests and prophets and things like, just priests. So they didn't have, a bordered section of Israel. They just had cities. So that's why that was important. Finally, we're getting to dealing with the poor, the impoverished in the country. If your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and sojourner, and he can live with you. He's going to be a worker for you. You're not going to get interest from him for profit. You're not going to lend him money at interest. You're not going to give him food for profit. You are taking care of your neighbor. You're your brother's keeper. If it was really bad, he could sell himself as a worker, but he wasn't going to be a servant. He would be a servant, but he wouldn't be a slave. Now, he would be free. He and his children would go back to his own clan in the year of Jubilee, because you're all Israelites, you're all equal. You would not rule over him ruthlessly, but you would fear God. Now, this was different from slaves that were foreign slaves. Now, I've already said my piece on that, but this is different. If you were really poor, you could sell yourself to a stranger. That would be kind of the last resort. Now, strangers could come and stay with Israel. They had people that lived among them. I think they were generally people that also wanted to serve God, but they could buy and sell property. Now, they couldn't own it because they weren't part of the tribes, so the year Jubilee went back to the people. But if a stranger or sojourner among you becomes rich and your brother beside him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. Just like the land, just like the house, brothers, uncles, cousins would redeem him, or a close relative from his clan. Or if he grew rich, he could redeem himself. He would calculate that buyer, just like the land, from the year he sold himself until the year of Jubilee, and the price of his sale would be that number of years. So he would basically be a hired worker for that person. An indentured servant is kind of what we took from that, kind of into the new land, into America. That's kind of what they had, was indentured servants, which I think was a 7-year term, and you could buy your freedom if you got there early. But it seems like it was based kind of off this Sabbath year Jubilee type of principle. So the thing was, you would not treat them poorly, especially if they were Israelites. They were your equal, whether they were your worker or not. You weren't to treat slaves poorly. We kind of went over that in Exodus. Again, that's kind of a minimum standard for how you would treat people below you. You still treat them with respect. They're still made in the image of God. You're not to be treating them all poorly. But if an Israelite was hired as a worker, he was still released in the year of Jubilee, and his children and wife and whoever. Then he could go back to his familial lands. So God ends with this. For it is to me that the people of Israel are servants. You're serving God. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So God was setting up how you treat each other. When you're rich, when you're poor, this is how you're going to treat each other. I think in America today we could use a lot of some of these. We could use some of these principles to not be so greedy, to not try to build up giant walls, giant corporations, giant farms that just trample over everything else. I think it would be healthy for our country today to go back to more small farms than few big farms. I think it would be healthy for people to be closer to their land, closer to where their food is grown. That was kind of a side effect of what God was doing here. And I think if it's not going to happen like as a country policy, but I think if that's how we thought about how we're supposed to treat each other, don't take advantage of the poor. Don't try to just build yourself up something massive that can run over everyone else because God's still in charge. I think that would benefit us greatly. I think how we treat each other really matters. Remembering where we came from. Remembering who is ultimately in charge. So as we go into this weekend, let's remember that. Have a good day.